Excellent. Okay. So welcome, everyone. I'm Margaret Pizzala Garland. I'm the director of the Art Gallery. I'm really happy to have Tim Portlock here to share his work with us. As you probably already know, he's one of the artists of the Futures Without Bounds exhibition. So he's one of the artists who was engaged by the curator, Angela McMillan, to make work for this exhibition. He's a photographer previously located in Philadelphia. And I'd actually talked to Nita before about his work. So we were really pleased that he was going to be a part of this exhibition. And you are now joining us from Wisconsin, correct?
Yes.
So thank you so much for joining us. And I think we will just get going since we're off to a little bit of a late start. We can save time for questions at the end if you think that would work best. You can put questions in the chat, or I can unmute people, whatever works best for folks. But Tim, I'll let you take over, and thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Can you remind me again how much time for talking and how before I open it up to questions?
We
talk a lot.
We have just about 50 minutes. So if we do maybe 40 minutes for talking and 10-15 minutes for questions, does that seem good?
Okay. Okay. Hi, I'm Tim Portlock. That's my name on the presentation. I was trained as a painter formally, and then I got really interested in digital technology. And about 10 years after I graduated from graduate school with a painting degree, and I went back to school for digital technology. I went to school at a computer graphics research laboratory where I learned a lot about a lot of the tools that I use to this day. I think that immediately after I graduated from that program, I was really interested in real-time graphics, which can include a lot of different things like virtual reality or 3D computer games. I was really interested in storytelling, like interactive storytelling. But one of the things that happened is a lot of the tools that are made for interactive storytelling, like, for example, 3D computer games, these are very labor-intensive endeavors. And because I sort of came out of a more traditional art background, my expectation was I was going to create work that purely reflected my own interests, not from like a collaborative team. So eventually I decided to rethink how I work. So I started to make work that was kind of a hybrid of the sort of the technology that I had learned, but also sort of like based on like the lineage of painting. So I started to make 3D images that I would then turn into 2D images, and I'd print them out. So I just have this image as an example of kind of the work that I'm making now. Like it's not like entirely up to date, but this is within the last 5 years. And this is an image from a museum exhibition I had in St. Louis. So one of the big motivations to make this work was relocating to Philadelphia, which at the time had 30,000 empty and abandoned buildings. And I was really impacted by this sort of scale of destitution in Philadelphia. And I decided to make work that sort of focused on that, because I think not only was it really kind of awesome, and I don't mean that in a positive way, like it inspired the scale of sort of emptiness inspired awe. But also it made me think of like how did things got that way, and what were the sort of conditions in the city that allowed that to happen. So I started out by riding my bike around my neighborhood, which had a lot of buildings that look like this or like these. And then I would take photographs to use as source material. I think one of the things that happens with my work is it gets conflated with photography, and actually photography is part of the process, but it's my work is not photography. It's digitally generated imagery, and I use photography as reference material. So I go into my software and I try to recreate, or at least at that time, I would go into my software and try and recreate a 3D digital version of the buildings from reference photos. And then I would make a library of these buildings until I had enough to make my own version of the city. Um, or at least a portion of the city, sort of a fictionalized uh, accounting of the same city that I was living in. Um, so I started to explore Philadelphia and incorporate more and more buildings from different parts of the city. And then I would construct these images. And so oftentimes, or not often, all the time, you'll get buildings that are in different parts of the city coexisting in the same image as if they were um, existed side by side. And, you know, just contrasting architecture styles and architectural purposes and different uses, I was able to make sort of a meaning. Um, so in this image, there are buildings from sort of the industrial part of North Philadelphia, and then there's residential buildings from West Philadelphia. Um, and then there's parts that don't even actually exist. So like the sky is completely, made up, and that statue in the center is completely made up. I used I like came up with the pose for the statue and everything. And then this is like one of the few images where I use Google Maps to make sort of like the ground plane. Um, so here's an example of, contrasting architectural styles. On the right side, you have what a lot of you probably recognize is the first Congress of the United States from when Philadelphia was the capital of the United States, which is several hundred years old, and it's been maintained in almost pristine condition. And then on the left side, or our left, are warehouse buildings that were probably built in the early 20th to mid 20th century, which are abandoned and totally degraded. And so in this image, I was really interested in the paradox of a several century old building that was in pristine shape, which embodies idea of Americanness, versus buildings that were probably only 100 years old, that had probably been abandoned decades ago. And what does that contrast tell us about life in contemporary American cities? So these things are not geographically next to each other in real Philadelphia, but they are in my image because I'm trying to make a point about something. Um, and I had had a long-term interest in Hudson River Valley painting, which is a landscape tradition that's specific to America. And I would say if you could boil it down to like what makes it different, what makes it a school of painting is it's an idea of that these images are communicating ideas about American identity. And so moving to a historic city like Philadelphia, which is in my mind kind of associated with that kind of painting, um, it gave me some ideas about where is American these ideas about American identity come from, and how does that contrast with sort of contemporary lived reality in contemporary American cities. And you have to put contemporary in quotation marks because like this a lot of this work was made in like 2008 to 2012. So around the time of the economic collapse, so-called economic collapse. So I started incorporating these conventions from this genre of landscape into my work. Um, this sort of like um, prismatic sky, certain like vantage point relationship to the landscape, um, flora and fauna of the place that were particular to the place. So here's an image that I made more closely or was more closely modeled on a specific Hudson River Valley painting. So this is Thomas Cole, famous Thomas Cole painting, and then this is my image based on his painting. And Thomas Cole was, I don't know, he's kind of like a proto-environmentalist in that he uh believed, like a lot of people in this like weird Protestant romantic tradition, believed that nature was an embodiment of God. And so you have like these paintings of people alone out in nature communing with God. There's like famous painting of the guy standing on the mountain, uh et cetera, et cetera. So to damage nature is kind of like a form of sacrilege, right? And so that's what this painting is. It's about the encroachment of industrialization on the American landscape. And that I think this painting was intended to communicate a sense of anxiety about that. And then, around this time, the economic collapse is happening in America, and um, which is kind of a reversal of what his concerns, right? It's industrialization is leaving the landscape. Nature is starting to take over cities because people are abandoning their homes, and so there's like an anxiety from the other direction, right? It's like an undoing of the things that Thomas Cole was originally uh, anxious about. So again, I'm incorporating more and more of these conventions from his paintings. You can start to see some more and more similarities. Also, one thing to keep in mind is a lot of this work from the past that I'm referencing also takes a lot of creative liberties with what they're painting. So there's another school of, I mean, there's many different ideas about nature that sort of falls on the umbrella of Hudson River Valley painting. Like, so, Thomas Cole is like nature embodies God. And then there's other people who are like, America is just basically a big pot of gold, and if you're a rugged individual, you can come and get your bag if you come to America, and just start mining, extracting, et cetera, et cetera. So you start to see precursors of this idea of manifest destiny in some of this work. So I'm kind of playing around and referencing all of that stuff in my work. But one other component is um, sort of a weird, oftentimes painting of real spaces that exist in America, like that Thomas Cole painting, for example. Like that place exists. He went to that place. He did lots of sketches, but then there's subtle differences, right? And so there's sort of another dynamic happening with these images, which I'm also using, which is this idea that nature embodies ideas. So, like Thomas Cole had this thing about God, but I'm talking about something else. Um, like there's a French landscape painting tradition, there's a British landscape painting tradition, and all of these images, all these national traditions have images that are meant to convey something about national identity as if it's embedded into the geography. And when one of the tools to do that is to take creative license. And so that's another thing that I'm doing. So like for instance, in my work, some of you may recognize there's that building in the background that's sort of dominating the landscape, and that's mostly based on the Philadelphia City Hall. But if you know that, you also see that there's the statue on top of my version of City Hall is very different from the statue on top of the real City Hall. So there's like little shifts like that are happening. I went to so I made that series of work about Philadelphia. That's where I started to get the like some of my early ideas about making this work. And so I decided to make another body of work based on Las Vegas. And part of the reason why is it had become the home foreclosure capital of the world. And I knew that there would be a lot of empty and abandoned buildings there. And also, um, Las Vegas had been a subject of interest by art theorists for a while. You know, there's Jean Baudrillard wrote this book called America, which is in the tradition of French intellectuals coming to America and sort of writing about it. And then they're not artists per se, they're architects. So there's Learning from Las Vegas by Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. And all of these people sort of talk about Las Vegas as like a spectacle, like a place where you see things and not from where you like feel things or taste things. And then this idea of spectacle that I think they use as like an emblem of American culture more broadly, like, you know, from like a European perspective, that's like a critique of America, is that we're all about, you know, the show and not about the, you know, deep thoughts. And so I was really interested in um, sort of the visceral qualities of Las Vegas. Like, what does it feel like to be there? And like there are these images, but like there are actually like people who work to maintain these images. You know, there's waiters and busboys and, you know, people driving delivery trucks and whatnot. And so for me, that's what I was sort of getting at with some of these images. The other thing is, you know, Las Vegas, like there was this discussion about the failure of cities for some reason. Like that discussion got conflated with the home foreclosure crisis. Um, the thing that the reason why it is a weird conversation is because this problem was happening in rural areas too. But at any rate, Las Vegas was being held up as for a while as a success story, like it was able to endure the home foreclosure crisis, and the theory was that it had a different economic model. And then the home foreclosure hit it, and then it became the worst example, right? So anyway, I made these images. I started doing research also. Like I do research for all my work. Um, but you know, because I lived in Philadelphia, I sort of had a different relationship to research. Like I would read a book about Philadelphia and I would ride my bike and I would talk to people that I knew. But I did not live in Las Vegas. So I had a little anxiety that I was missing something about it. Like I was making work about a place that I didn't know very well. And so I began to think more seriously about how what things I could do to get to know Las Vegas, or at least have some way of checking if I was focused on things that were relevant to Las Vegas. So, through a friend of a friend of a friend, I made a connection with a reporter for the National Public Radio affiliate of Las Vegas, she covered a lot of things, but some of it was like immigration issues and labor in Las Vegas. And so when I would go there to shoot um, reference material photos, I would meet with her and we would have conversations, and then I would also email her questions from time to time to ask her about stuff I was reading or if there was stuff that she thought I should look at. So while I was doing that, I would oftentimes fly to Las Vegas and or fly to Los Angeles to visit relatives and then drive to Las Vegas. And there was sort of a city in between called San Bernardino, which then became the home foreclosure capital. And so I decided to make work about that. But the reasons for that was a different set of some of those reasons were related to Las Vegas and Philadelphia, and then some were particular to San Bernardino. And so I did a lot of research around that. I had also friend through a friend ended up meeting the photo department at UC California State San Bernardino. And all these people in the photo department had worked in San Bernardino for decades and were getting ready to retire. And they were street photographers, so they knew San Bernardino super well. And not only were they giving me some really interesting insider information about San Bernardino, but we were also able to have really long conversations about the ethics of images as they related to, other places that you do not live in. So it's very eye-opening. Um, I'm going kind of fast. So this is some work I made about Camden, New Jersey, where I also interviewed people. And for this one, I tried to spend more time up front on the interviews and less time exploring the city until after I had done the interviews. What my goal for this work was to try and depend more on other people's descriptions and less on my own sort of framework that I was bringing into the place. And for this, like I invited people to lunch. I only got to interview a few people, but um, like four or five people, but they all had certain things in their conversations about San Bernardino that overlapped. And like the conversations would be very casual, but I was at some point steer them towards two questions or two prompts. One was, where do you imagine Camden will be like in 10 years? And then also give me an anecdote that embodies your ideas about the what it's like to be in Camden. And the overlap was they all gave me the same thing of an anecdote. It was all about something that happened in Camden. I think it was in the 80s or the 90s. It's been a while since I've met with them because it's old work. They all talked about there was either a riot or a protest, depending on your perspective, that triggered sort of the final wave of white flight out of Camden. And that seemed to be a reoccurring theme was the white flight, and then how that left Camden very destitute over time. So this is sort of the most recent work from this sort of type of working. And one thing that had changed, there were a couple of things that had changed. One was it was like around the 10-year anniversary of 2008, I started to think about my work like, oh, this is like a good opportunity to reevaluate what I've been doing and what motivated this stuff to begin with. And um, this is right before COVID. Um, Construction cranes were ubiquitous in the skyline of all major cities, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, New York. There's just a lot of construction going on. And whereas 10 years earlier, the seeing empty and abandoned buildings used to generate anxiety in people, like everyone, rich people, poor people, whatever. Um, now, now it started to depend on like how much investment money you had, right? So like if you saw an empty building in, I don't know, 2019, it's like, oh, that might be a real estate or development opportunity. Or if you didn't have that money, it was like, oh, maybe we might get gentrified out of this neighborhood, right? So all of those things had changed in 10 years. And then um I wanted to my work to reflect those changes. And then also some of the technology that wasn't really useful for my own work had matured. And so I started to incorporate them more into my working process, which also changed some qualities of my work. So um drones became really cheap, well, cheaper. And then also the like what was in earlier in 2000 called photogrammetry had matured and gotten more sophisticated. So now I was able to fly drones around buildings and drone scan them. And then I upload a sequence of pictures to some scanning service online, and then maybe 20 minutes later I'll get a 3D model of a building. So now my images are like really like a hybrid of different ways of working. So like in this image, for example, in the background are buildings that are in the process of being constructed, and those are based on buildings. The construction site I saw in East Los Angeles, and I created those buildings in Maya from reference images that I shot, and then the building on the right with the highly reflective windows, I made that up because I wanted a building that looked very modernist or contemporary, and I wanted to play around with different ways of reusing some of those conventions from the 19th century, but in a new way. And then some of those items on the top, like the trees and the grass, those are things I just bought online because I don't need to do that. It's like I don't need to make those things. It's like really time consuming, but I can just buy them from someone for $5 and incorporate them in my work. And then the building on the left is a building that I drone scanned that's in East St. Louis. Um, and it just took me 20 minutes to fly a drone around it, and I got a highly detailed model. Um, there's other various bits and pieces, but like that's kind of where my working style, my working process is these days. So I have things that reference things going on in different cities because I feel like there were things that were kind of universally happening in big American cities at that time. Some things are like a little bit more obvious, like what area, what region they come from. This image, everything is completely made up. There's nothing from like the real world here. I mean, you might recognize that building in the background. It's funny, like I had made this image and I had never actually visited that place, and so like I decided I'm gonna go visit it. And then when I get there to actually go inside of it, they had shut it down forever 2 days earlier because people were unfortunately ending their lives by jumping off of it. And they put up preventative measures after enough people had done it, and then someone successfully did it again. So I guess they just shut it down permanently for the public at least. And I have these images just to give an idea of scale. I make smaller version of these images, but like I had a show at this museum, they just like you can make these as big as you want. And then when I was like, okay, this is how big I want to make it, they were like, okay, maybe not that big. So this was kind of like the compromise. So my last big project was for this exhibition called Counter Publics in St. Louis. And they invited all these artists to do public art projects around the city. And one of the site I chose was next to the former site of Pruitt-Igoe, which was a very nationally known public housing project. And there were these laws passed, had just been passed to end segregation by race in America. And so this public housing project was built, and it was like the first explicitly mixed race housing complex in the United States. And it failed for a lot of reasons. Um, the reasons are up for debate, but the like multiracial aspect of it quickly ended and became like a black um it was held up as like a black public housing project pretty quickly. um it was poorly funded, so the maintenance declined very rapidly, and um it was actually they cut a lot of corners and it was designed very poorly, so it just degraded very quickly. And and so it was used for all kinds of different to make all kinds of political points. The most famous one for me, at least, because went to art school around this time, um, is this uh, sort of kingpin of postmodernism in the 90s, or I think it was late 80s, wrote a book called The Condition of Postmodernity. And he wrote that modernism ended when they blew up Pruitt-Igoe. And so there's all these famous pictures of Pruitt-Igoe collapsing. And uh, yeah, it was held up as like the death of modernism, uh, because the idea that you could sort of rationally plan people's lives was used as an illustration to discredit that notion, right? Um, so I was teaching at Washington University in St. Louis at the time, and so I tracked down some of the former residents of Pruitt-Igoe and interviewed them to hear their side of the story. Because this is pretty famous. Um, I thought and then there's a lot of arguments for why it failed. I thought I'd ask the actual people who lived there what their own experience was there, right? Not necessarily why it failed, but like, what was their life like there? I found one woman who was a white woman in her late 90s who was a civil rights activist. She was a member of SNCC, so she moved in there for um, because she thought she was contributing to a better future for America and she wanted to be involved with that. Another person who ended up becoming an architect, he ended up going to architecture school, becoming really successful. While he was in graduate school at Washington University, he went with his fellow students to watch them blow up Pruitt-Igoe like it was a big event. Washington University has like one of the top 10 architecture schools in the world. And so, I'm sure this was like some kind of like real life case study for them. But it was really interesting for me to talk to him about what it was like for him personally to be there with these other people who are not from there to watch the place he used to live get blown up and talked about in very clinical, theoretical terms. And then another person um, I met, his family moved there and he just lived there and he has a different set of memories. I interviewed a few other people, but um, it was too difficult to incorporate their stories into this project. So anyway, I made these images, these billboard-like images, where I visualized some of their anecdotes and stories onto the billboards using Maya. And then I also put up excerpts from my interviews with them. Oh, here's what Pruitt-Igoe used to look like. Sorry, and this is sort of, I have this picture in here because it sort of gets at what people thought was going to happen. Like people got dressed up to go see the apartment. Some of the people I interviewed were telling me that the place they had lived at before they moved into Pruitt-Igoe, literally like there was an outhouse and they were sleeping on dirt floors in a basement. And so to go to Pruitt-Igoe was like stepping into the next century, right? Like you're going from like 19th century to modernist 20th century. You're like state of the art. Um, And then this is the iconic photo, which, you see in a lot of like architecture journals, or if you go to architecture conferences, this is ubiquitous. And so like that guy I was telling you about who became an architect, he says like, yeah, I go to conferences all over the world and this photograph follows him. And people flip out when they find out he actually lived there. Okay, and this is what it looks, this is what the site looks like now, right? Like it used to be you could take a tour through the forest. It's very post-apocalyptic. So they didn't completely, they tore down most of it, but then they're like, you walk through this forest and there'll just be these structures. It'll be like a random fire hydrant or a stop sign. People will camp there. And so this is my work, which is across the street. Like, so this is one corner. That's the global spatial US Global Geospatial Institute. That's basically where all the drone data is, for doing military actions around the world. And it just started being constructed, it was, I'm sorry, it was in the midpoint of being constructed when my project went up. So like across the street from the former site is like this basically military surveillance arm of the US government. And then on the other side of the street is sort of like my memorial to Pruitt-Igoe. Um, and that billboard in the foreground, that's an actual like real estate developer billboard. And I kind of modeled my project on that, right? Like, um, this is a very common way of announcing that a new thing is about to be constructed. And I just wanted to be a little ironic because the thing that my billboards are referencing had already been torn down. So, I mean, I can stop here because I think that might be 40 minutes, but I had a little snippet from my last talk where I talked about AI, not that I have work to show, but just because I'm really fascinated by it right now. Um, and that's about, I'll just end it at that. If people want me to talk some more, I can talk some more. All right, we'll end it at that.
Oh, well, thank you. So I think for questions, probably people can, if you're online, you can unmute. If you're here, you can ask questions. You can probably hear us, hopefully, if we talk.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cool. So any questions from anyone? Yeah.
My question is, what's the goal for your artwork? Is it to like reach an audience to like teach them about these cities? Like, is it to get like some kind of action to like help them like rebuild maybe these apartments, get people living in them again?
I don't know if I have a goal. I mean, I think the first thing is like these are things I'm interested in. These are things that I think about. Like, I'm only gonna make art about things that I'm personally interested in. Um, if people want to act on some of the stuff that I'm doing, that's great. I think if I was like really goal oriented, I would probably do this differently. I would probably make a movie or a documentary and think really hard about how to distribute it to reach a lot more people, or maybe I'd get into politics. But I do think there is a political benefit to me talking about these things, right? Like maybe I think if enough people are interested about some of these, or enough artists or creative people are interested in sort of similar things, it will sort of create a more enduring awareness or consciousness about some of these issues. Um, so that's that's my answer.
How much like rendering and processing power does your images take? Like you have an idea?
They take a lot actually. The very first couple of times I did this stuff like over 10 years ago, I would render them out on my laptop, and because I had never done it before, I didn't know how long it take to render them. And like I would put my laptop in the freezer while I was rendering because my laptop would get really hot. But after a while, I discovered these things called render farms. And so that's where there's these places that have hundreds of processors, and so something that would take several days will take 20 minutes at a render farm, but cost maybe $100 to $300 per image. um now with AI, things have it's changed so dramatically in such a short period of time. I'm still trying to figure out like how I'm going to do this. And there's the AI that people think about where you like type a prompt and it just generates some image based on some training it had done. The thing I'm talking about using AI for is like I used to have to render like make these ginormous modeled scenes, and now I can just model like a little tiny scene and put it to AI, and AI will blow it up and look at the details that are pre-existing in my image and like make the resolution really, really sharp as a blown up image, and also add details that are consistent with the image. Or I could just give it more versions of my work and it will take details from that and it will do it really quickly. So I've like done experiments with this stuff, but I haven't actually made a body of work yet. I'm actually supposed to have a show in Philadelphia in the spring. Uh exact date to be determined, but I'm that's where I'm starting to gear up to make work using these new processes for that. But so to answer your question, yes, it takes a long time, but I'm about to try something different, which will not take a long time.
Any
I have a
other
quick question.
Oh.
I was just going to ask you, Tim, if you can talk about the work that's in the exhibition as it relates to your body of work.
Yeah. So coincidentally, so my pat almost all of my work, I guess one way you could talk about it is a form of data visualization. Like I think people look at my work and they're like, "Oh, this is post-apocalyptic, blah blah blah." I don't know. I don't agree with that. What I'm trying to do is make images that are based on very specific details from a place that I'm going to, right? It's like that's what data visualization is you're excluding information to focus the viewers on information because there's something important about that, um, about the thing you want them to focus on. Uh, the work in the show is basically a form of speculative fiction, or I mean, I guess the term science fiction is a little passe, um, because to think about the future does not always involve science. Um, but it's an idea about like what is another possible future based on like contemporary facts. And to me, that's kind of related to what I how I think of my work, you know, my past work. It's like based on these facts, you know, what kinds of conclusions or what things, what specific details about right now am I going to focus on to talk about the future, and how does sort of speculating about the future make us rethink our present time? So I mean that's a really billowy answer to your question, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about the relationship. But I mean for this show, I was like given a really specific conceptual framework, right? Like imagine a future without guns. And so for my image, I was like, well, what were the things that need to happen for that to happen in Philadelphia and in, you know, in a broader context in America with, you know, Second Amendment and all that stuff. And then my idea was like there had to be a really massive social event, like disaster that would make it undeniable that guns would have to be outlawed. And so the landscape in my image is like sort of the remains of or a society that is trying to emerge from whatever that disaster is, and then also making their monuments to a past that or commemorates a past where there was violence and an overcoming of the idea of having violence. So yeah. But you know, the cool thing about that project is it sort of gave me the green light to think about more speculative work. So that's like my next project. I'm also interested in like alternate history. So like my next project is going to be an alternate history. There's next year is the 250th anniversary of America, and there's going to be all these things happening. And I was invited to make a project in this place that was a bar in like 1750 or you know, and it's just been newly restored. And so my contribution is I'm going to make a big giant image that imagines Philadelphia if slavery had been outlawed in the writing of the Constitution. And um, you know, I've been doing research on that because it almost happened, but it's interesting to think about like what would 20th century America be like if that had happened? Um, and you know, how would things be different globally? Like one of the things that, you know, one interesting factoid is that, you know, Nazi Germany started developed some of their like race laws based on Jim Crow race laws. And, you know, it's just like there's weird little things that would have been different, you know, had things gone differently in America with regarding slavery, or if it had ended earlier, or who knows. But chat AI claims, depending on when you ask it, that America would have gotten industrialized in the 18th century if that had happened. Like we would have been technologically more advanced if slavery had ended sooner. But I don't know.
Other questions online, just unmute and ask if you want to.
Hi, I'm curious because you were saying that you've traveled to a lot of American cities to do your work. Um, like, have you ever traveled to other countries or like, and if you haven't, what country would you like to go to?
I just got back from being in Southeast Asia for 15 months. I just got back. I just got back in mid-August, and you know, I had proposed doing so like over tourism is a thing. Like I spent a year in Indonesia. I learned how to speak Indonesian like before I went. For I studied it for several years, and then Bali is a province of Indonesia. So you know, I went to Bali a lot. Um, and it is not at all like how it's depicted in YouTube and all these other things. Um, I had written like for my Indonesian class, I had written about Bali for my papers. And then the year I went to Indonesia, there was all these over tourism protests happening all over the world. Sort of initially, it was like they were all independent of each other, but now they're starting to build networks to strategize how to deal with it. And so that's one thing. Indonesia, I went to. I did an artist residency in Central Java for 2 months, and um, my proposal, which I still haven't acted on, I've done a lot of research, was the pollution of rivers in Java. So like I used to for 30 years or almost 30 years I was exclusively an art professor, but now I have a joint appointment in environmental studies and in art. And so I was really interested in like there's a river in Java called the Solo River, and it's sort of part of Indonesian identity and Javanese identity is this river, like it's in songs and mythology and whatnot. And then it just became extremely polluted. Now it's like slightly less polluted. but I started doing research. I started walking around the Solo River and shot a lot of video and photos of it. And I learned about some of the Javanese mythology that involved the Solo River. And then there's also like this history of the, recent history, like there was a genocide in Indonesia in 65, and so there was a lot of bodies dumped in the Solo River. There's no sort of like public memorial because it's, the bad guys won that one. But I feel like it's connected, that it's polluted, and that people throw their trash in the river and then throw bodies in the river, and there's sort of this idea that stuff just like disappears if you put it in the river, but it really it doesn't disappear. Um, what else? I spent before I came back, the 3 months before I came back, I spent in Thailand. I have a show there in the summer. I'm still thinking about it, but they're very open to whatever I want to do. So the for my artist residency in Thailand, which is finished, that's where I really started to experiment with AI and began thinking about this sort of ethical, all the different problems with it, and how to, and if those were navigable, or at the very least what kind of work could I make about those problems. But just like the work that you've seen, I just shot a lot of video and photos and applied AI to it to do different things. Um, one of the things about Thailand is there's a royal family, and there's they're very public in a way, like, we know the British royal family, and there's like little insignia here and there if you go to the UK, but in Thailand, like the king's picture is everywhere on the side of buildings, on billboards in the middle of the street. Their royal crest or insignia are on the side of buildings. And so, I would photograph these buildings, and that stuff would enter into my work that I would process through AI. And then um, I would show the people at the art running the artist residency. They're like, oh, you got to get rid of that. Because like you could get in real trouble. So like that's I don't have like a solid idea. I just know I want to make work about the city of Bangkok. And I feel like there has to be some kind of acknowledgement in the work that there's like this idea of what's safe to reference in the work versus what you can't. But I want my work to mirror what's outside of the gallery window.
Thank you.
The one thing I will say, just to, I know I'm like kind of long-winded. I think you have to be really careful when you make work. Like, obviously, that's something I'm concerned about, but when you make work about a place that you don't live in, I mean, you have to be careful about that too, but I think you have to be extra careful. It's like the further you get away from where you live, the more care you need to take about how you depict others. So that's going into this. Like, I feel like I can make work about tourism in Bali. Like, I'm a tourist, right? And there's other tourists, and I'm making critique of people like me who are going to Bali, and then their behavior and how they've degraded it. But it would be different if I'm making work about Balinese people, and how do I don't know. It's just like you have to. I think you have to just take a lot of care.
I have a I have a question for you. Have you seen Josh Oppenheimer's The Act of Killing?
Yes, that was one of
Okay,
my favorite movies.
yeah.
And then
It's his work is amazing, but it's making me think a lot about your work and some of the relationships there, the reflections of that. But my quick question is, can you share a reading list of, I think for our students, it would be really helpful to have maybe like your top 10 And maybe it includes videos and movies and things like
Okay.
that.
Yeah. I definitely would put that on the top 10 list. He did a sequel to that, and then as far as I know, he hasn't made a movie since then.
He was just covered in the New York Times. I think there was a big interview.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, and I can't remember. It has to be because there's something new. There has to be, because otherwise, why would he be in the newspaper, right? But yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, we're right at 1:30, but I think if there are any like last questions anyone wants to speak, that would be great. Oh, you're muted, Lisa.
Elizabeth?
Yes, hi. My name is Lisa Very. Thank you so much for the talk. It was very interesting and lots of good ideas. I'd love to continue the conversation at some point. But I'm just very, very curious if you can say a few little things about your current research on AI. I know you just touched on it very briefly, and I know we cannot really get into it, but if you can just say some of the questions you're really engaging with right now.
Well, I mean, there's so many things.
Yeah.
I mean, so I just think a lot about the ethical stuff, and
Mhm.
so there's the environmental impact, there's the idea of labor and creativity,
Mhm.
and then I really enjoy using it. Even though it has a lot of problems,
Yeah.
like the first time I started using it, the first time I used it, I was like, oh, this is really lame. Like I put
Yeah.
some prompts in and I got some really hackneyed looking garbage out of it. And then I stopped using, yeah, I'm always interested in new technology, obviously. And then I started to see art, like people who sort of stuck with it on my like Instagram feeds. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I've never seen work like this. This is work that wasn't possible before AI. And so I was like, oh, there are new qualities to this. We can call it a medium, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, so that's when I became really interested and gave it a second look. And then so here's a couple of things that I've been thinking about. It's like we're I think all of us here live in America, and it's a very different model for AI than there is in China right now. So like, there's a lot of investment in American AI being this like industry with like data centers and all this stuff that suck up a lot of energy, and there's just a lot of peril with this model. And then I remember like maybe 6 months 9 months ago, people in China introduced this alternate called DeepSeek, and I didn't
Mhm.
like people freaked out, but it wasn't clear to me why. And the the more research I did, the more I understood that it was a different, not only like a different product, but it presented a different model for AI that did not rely on this model of like a big industry, that it doesn't use up resources the way it does in America. And so you know, the my understanding is like right now, America would be clearly in a recession if it wasn't for investment in AI data centers. Like really, our country has like bet the farm on AI, and that as soon as that bubble bursts, we're in like 2008 economic level trouble. So there's that. There's the training the AI. Um, which is, they're not compensating people for, using their material. So on some, I totally sympathize with that. And I've been on like Zoom meetings with like really serious people who like they use AI, and like their big concern is like, I can't copyright my work so someone else won't profit off of it. And there's this weird short side. It's like, well, you're using AI, which profit is off of someone else's. Um, so I get that. The thing about creativity is I actually am like skeptical about that though. It's like, um, I do think that AI, if you're like lazy with it, it's like a very uncreative thing. And that actually as an artist, you have to be creative to get it to do something interesting or unique. I think AI is not going to make art that speaks to our moment. Like AI isn't going to make work about Donald Trump. AI isn't gonna like think about what is the nature of originality. Like you have to formulate this idea and then tell it what to do to embody your critique of these things, right? Um, and then the other thing is like if you think about artists, it's like how many artists are like that original, or just like recycling ideas. And then I have a very traditional art school training. I like took art history classes, and isn't this what like wasn't that the function that was supposed to have, is like I'm learning how to make new art based on like precedents. So I'm actually like skeptical about the originality argument critique, but I am invested in the like labor critique. And I think the way America is using AI is the wrong way to go, but I do think that AI is worthwhile if we can do it a different way in this country. I've been learning about it technically, so like, most people do pay like a subscription fee basically. I mean, there's different words. Some people call it credits or whatever, but basically it's subscription. But I've been trying to learn the more technical approach to this, like using AI software where you actually can train your own models. Like I was trying to train it to make my own work
Mhm.
based on my previous work. It did a very bad job. But anyway, I don't have like a I have like random thoughts about it, and I'm just really super fascinated by it. I will probably have like more coherent um, things to say in the future, but I love talking to people about it.
It's changing so fast too.
Yeah.
It's like there's so much happening all the time, and to respond to. But yeah, thank you for sharing
Yeah.
your thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any last questions or comments or? I was also really intrigued that you were thinking about AI because, I mean, from those very first images that you showed us and talked about riding around the city on your bike. There's just such a strong point of view in all of the things you make. Often it's like a little bit elevated or maybe a little bit more elevated above the city, but there's just such a strong sense of like a person looking at the space that I'm also really intrigued, like how you will work with AI and kind of what that will look like in your future images. So yeah, I'm curious also. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you all. This was a good way to spend the start of our Friday afternoon. Thank you for joining us, Tim. Thanks for making time in your schedule.
Thank you.
And we're so glad we had you look in the show.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone.
All right. Take care, you guys. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Take care. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Let's see, where do I go?